everyone. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new. My name is Kristen. This is my booktube, and I wasn't planning on doing a reading vlog this week, but I am in the full swing of my Hunger Games read through. I'm about 7 chapters into the first book, and I have things to say. So rather than trying to keep track of the thoughts that I'm having and waiting until the end of the month to talk about them, I'm just going to talk about them in this reading vlog as I'm reading and as they happen. So if you've been keeping up with what I've been reading recently, I did finish the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes at the beginning of November. It is currently November 10th, and since then I have begun rereading the Hunger Games. I'm only about 7 or 8 chapters into the first book, and I'm really glad that I decided to do this read through the way that I did. And for those that have not watched my previous videos, essentially what I decided to do was to read the prequel before starting a reread of the Hunger Games trilogy. I was a huge fan of the Hunger Games books and the movies when they came out years and years ago. And I was a Hunger Games girly. I was deep down the Tumblr fandom rabbit hole when that was a thing in like 2012 to 2014. That was in my peak Tumblr time. I was always on Tumblr in those days, and I was way deep in the fandom. I love the book series so much, but I have not read those books since I did that initial read through 10 plus years ago. And so when the prequel came out and thinking about how I wanted to go about this read through, I decided that the best thing to do would be to read the prequel and just have the vague memories of what happened in the books and the movies in my head. That way they aren't completely fresh, and I could kind of take in the prequel with less detailed knowledge of what happens in the Hunger Games trilogy. And I think that that was a good way to do it because it is making this reread so much more engaging because I'm now looking at it as a continuation of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. That's kind of like the overview of how I planned this read through and where I am right now. It is just so interesting. Nothing has even really happened yet. Peeta and Katniss are still in the Capitol. They haven't even done their little strength assessment yet with the game makers. And I've been thinking so much about just the logistics of what they're doing right now and how different it is from the logistics of the 10th Hunger Games in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And I feel like the way that the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes ended leads me to believe that pretty much all of these changes between the 10th Hunger Games and the 74th Hunger Games in the first book were all the direct result of Coriolanus Snow. This doesn't give too much away, but the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes ends with Coriolanus taking on an internship to become a game maker. And because, Hunger Games has been out and around for so long, we know that he ends up as the evil President Snow by the time Katniss enters the arena. We know that he is, one, not a good dude, and that he will do whatever it takes to get and retain power. And because he was becoming a game maker at the end of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I think he even says, I have a lot of ideas on how we can change the games. It leads me to believe that literally everything that Katniss goes through before the games and during the games is a direct result of Coriolanus becoming a game maker. And it's also making the things that Katniss and Peeta go through before the Hunger Games start more sinister because they're so pre-planned and you know what the motivations behind them are now. So, for example, this is the thing that happened that made me want to sit down and talk about how I'm feeling. So in my read through, I am now to the part where Katniss and Peeta are about to go into training and learn, self-defense. They have different stations where you can learn different things before the games. And then they have their meeting with the game makers where they show off their skills. And if I remember right, because I haven't read this far yet, that gives them a certain rating and directly leads to people sponsoring them in the games. And it's kind of like an advertisement for the sponsors, because people want to sponsor strong people. And if you haven't read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, this again isn't really much of a giveaway, but in the 10th Hunger Games, there is none of that. In the 10th Hunger Games, there's no training. The tributes don't get fed. They're literally kept in an abandoned arena for people of the Capitol to come and look at them and see them before the Hunger Games start. And they don't get any training. They don't get any consultation. There's no opening games. There's no real pageantry to the Hunger Games in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It's really in that 10th Hunger Games that they are starting to make it more of a spectacle. The 10th Hunger Games is the first time that they have mentors in the game, and the first mentors are students at the academy in the Capitol, which is how Coriolanus gets to be a mentor for Lucy Gray Baird in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And it's also the first time that they have sponsors that can send tributes things in the arena. And it's also the first time that they allow betting on the Hunger Games. And both of those things, if I'm remembering correctly, were Coriolanus Snow's idea. And it seems like we are led to believe that all the other changes, all the other pageantry that's added in, forcing people to watch the games, basically turning it into kind of an Olympic style sporting event with the opening ceremonies and the interviews and, all the pageantry that you see in the Hunger Games, that makes it so dystopian and just icky feeling, for lack of a better term, was all devised by President Snow. And I feel like with the context of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, it's gonna make President Snow even more of a sinister character. Like, from what I remember, he's not really in much of the first book, aside from, angrily watching the games and then getting mad at the head game maker for letting two people win at the end, and then basically killing him. Well, forced suicide, Socrates style. I believe it was Socrates that was how he was killed. Maybe Aristotle. One of them. They were pretty much murdered the same exact way, if you didn't know that. Fun fact. Both forced to eat like a bowl of poisoned berries, essentially, and commit suicide. But that's besides the point. But yeah, it just really is giving more context to the villain of the main trilogy. And I just think it's so interesting. And as someone who loves getting new information and learning new things, and who already has a love for this series, it's really just giving my little fangirl heart even more to latch onto with this series. So that is pretty much all my thoughts right now. Like I said, I did not have a game plan going into this. Didn't really plan on recording a reading vlog like this early on. I toyed with the idea of doing a reading vlog of the Hunger Games, but I'm just having so many thoughts that I'm just gonna record it and we'll edit it together and do a little Hunger Games reading vlog. So yeah, that is how I'm feeling right now. And I'm sure there will be more thoughts and things that come up as the games go on in the story. But it's just really adding more creepy context and really showing how calculated and sinister these games are and how they really are rooted in President Snow. Like, even though he himself did not come up with the idea of the Hunger Games, it's literally something that is in his blood and kind of like runs in the family, if you want to call it that, because his father was one of the architects of the Hunger Games. It's just making for such an engaging and interesting read for me. And I'm very excited to continue reading, even though I know exactly what happens and I'm already like getting a little emotional when certain characters show up because I love them so much and I know that they just don't have a great end in this series. I think it's going to be a really fun reread because of the new context that I have for this series. So I'm really looking forward to sharing more thoughts as they come. So that is all I have right now because, like I said, nothing has really happened yet other than the reaping, and they are at the Capitol. Haven't even started training yet. So we got a lot more book to cover, and I'm sure I'll have more thoughts as we go along. So yeah, I will check in later when I have more things to say. Hello everyone, checking back in. It has been a few days since my last reading vlog check-in on the Hunger Games reread, but it's going pretty well. I've just been listening to it while I've been, putting away laundry, unpacking, things like that. So not really much to watch other than me sort out my life, and I'm gonna keep that to myself, You don't need to see the full extent of my mess. But I am getting towards the end of the first Hunger Games book, and tonight I think I'm going to pick up my physical copy and continue listening to the audiobook, but kind of read along as the narrator is reading the book and finish the book that way. I have under 2 hours left, I believe, at the speed that I'm listening to. So I should definitely be able to finish it tonight. So that is my plan for finishing up this first book. And then I'm gonna watch the movie, just as I talked about several times. As I said before, the prequel, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, really gives an interesting context to the Hunger Games book, just because there are certain things that I forgot about that are ingrained in the Hunger Games by the time that Katniss enters the arena that I just completely forgot about. And they are things that are either directly mentioned or kind of alluded to in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, kind of when they're like throwing out ideas about the games in general. Because all of the mentors are students, there's kind of like these lecture style courses that they have where they're talking about, you know, strategy leading into the games and things like that. And some of the ideas that get thrown around in that think tank style setting are either things that do get implemented into the Hunger Games at some point because they are a thing when Katniss is in the arena, or there are ideas that are kind of adjacent to things that do actually happen in the Hunger Games. And I just think that that is very interesting because without explicitly saying it, there is so much that you can connect between the two books just by reading the prequel and then going straight into the Hunger Games. So I'm really enjoying that. And what makes it even more interesting is the fact that in the first Hunger Games book, President Snow is not showing up. Like, if I remember correctly, I think the first time he shows up is at the very end of this book. It's just interesting that he's not even present in most of this book, yet he is like all I'm thinking about right now just because of the different perspective I have coming from the prequel into the first book. So I know that's how prequels work, but it's just really fun. You know, this is a series that I was so into when it first came out and when the movies were coming out. I read all the books and I was like so into this series that it's very interesting to have 10 years later a new vantage point that makes me kind of view the whole series in a different way. And I'm just having a great time with it. Isn't that fun? That's the goal, right? We're here to have fun. We're here to enjoy our reads. We're here to discover new books and rediscover the love of old books. And yeah, so it's working. It's happening. That is it for my check-in right now, and let's go ahead and just get reading and finish up this book. I'm gonna go find where I am in the physical book, and then we will hop right in. Checking back in. It is about 8:30 now. I have finished the first Hunger Games book. There are definitely a lot of things that I forgot about in this book. Like so many smaller details, some larger details that I just straight up don't remember. So that was a fun reread. And now I think I'm going to go ahead and watch the movie tonight so that I can watch it in the same sitting, essentially, as finishing the book. It's so interesting because this reread, because, like I said, because of the prequel that I just read, my focus is on the details of the games themselves. And now I'm like asking questions in my head about like, well, who came up with the quarter quell? And how all of these changes from the 10th games to the 74th games happened. And I just want to know more about President Snow's rise to power. And maybe this also stems from my like history brain and my fascination with like political power structures and stuff like that. I feel like I'm just wanting more information to fill those 64 years between The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and this first book. And I feel like I'm coming back with more questions than I have answers for. I don't know if a second prequel book is in the works or anything like that, but like I still have a lot of interest and a lot of questions. And I do think that it would make for an interesting book series spinoff to have a series kind of talking about President Snow's rise to power. And it's interesting because then it's from like a villain perspective because he's not a good guy. Even at the end of A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, he's not a good guy. Like he's already on his path to where he gonna be by the time this book happens. As far as my thoughts on this book, it's great. It's a super engaging read, just as engaging as it was the first time that I read it. And this time around, I did listen to the audiobook. I physically read the book when I was in high school. This is my 2010 copy. It's older than probably some of the people watching this video, but this is my initial copy that I bought when I was in high school. I sat down and kind of followed along and read the last probably 5 or 10 chapters of this book tonight. But other than that, I was exclusively listening to it up to that point. And it's just as good as I remembered it. It made me tear up at the same parts, mainly the parts surrounding Rue. And there's just going to be more tears to come because I think I shed a tear in every single one of these books when I read them in high school, and have no doubt I'm going to do the same this time around. So yeah, now we're going to watch the movie, and then we'll have a little catch up afterwards to tell you what I think after having finished the book and seeing the movie. I also need to cook some dinner, so let's go ahead and make some dinner, watch the movie, and then we will regroup in a little bit.
I think it's our tradition.
This is also a very small thing, but there is no scene at the reaping of Haymitch showing up late, super drunk, and then falling off the stage. And that's referenced multiple times throughout the book. So I'm kind of sad that it's not in the movie, because that sounded like a pretty funny moment that he then gets ridiculed for afterwards. But yeah, so again, not really vital to the story, just something that I kind of wanted to see, you know, something that I kind of liked in the original. Okay, so let's talk about the differences that I'm seeing between the 74th Hunger Games and the 10th Hunger Games. So in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, they talk about how when the tributes arrive at the Capitol, well, first of all, they arrive basically in a cattle car. Literally, I'm pretty sure I remember that's how it was described. They're all just like shoved together in this cattle car, and then they show up at the Capitol. And it's not like a fanfare thing. It's not like a spectacle to be beheld at all. Literally, Coriolanus, President Snow, is the only person that is there to greet the tributes because he's trying to like win brownie points for being a good mentor, whatever. But the point is it's not like a big fanfare thing. And at some point between the 10th Hunger Games and this one, it becomes like this whole Olympic opening ceremony kind of thing. Like they literally have the opening ceremonies. They have all of the tributes coming in on carriages and like all of this fanfare surrounding these people that are about to be put in an arena to fight to the death. And it's just so dissociative. I don't even know if that's the right thing to describe it. It's just so detached from what these people are doing. And to know that it was not that way, in at least in the earliest games, is just so interesting because these are all intentional changes that they made. And it's just like, it's so weird. Yeah, so it's just really interesting. And this is the kind of thing that I was talking about when I was saying I just want to know more, because I want to know whose idea it was to do stuff like that. Because it could have been done by people other than President Snow, but by the end of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I believe they left it in such a way to kind of guide people to believe that President Snow is literally the architect behind all of the changes from the 10th Hunger Games to the 74th. And if that's true, that is insane how twisted his mind has to be to come up with things like having talk show personality interviews for these people that are about to fight to the death. It's just so interesting. But yeah, I could sit here and psychoanalyze this all day and talk about how wild a concept that is. That we're led to believe that one person made all of these psychotic changes. But yeah, so that's just another interesting new angle I'm viewing this in. So I just wanted to share that. It's a little hard to articulate what I'm thinking, if I'm honest, but I'm trying my best. Another very interesting difference from the 10th Hunger Games to the 74th is that at some point in that time, they implemented the victor's village and all of the celebration stuff for the victor. In the 10th Hunger Games, they didn't get anything. Like, the only prize you get if you are the victor of the Hunger Games is you get to live. That's the prize. That's all they get. They don't get a house. The people in their district don't get anything. It's just you win, you get to survive and go home to your exact same life that you had before. And by the time Katniss is in the Hunger Games, they have a whole system of, you know, victors in victors' villages, and I believe everyone in the victor's district gets like so much grain and oil provided for them. And it's just, you can just tell how manipulative that is. And it's a way to get the people in the districts to invest in the games. Because then if one of their victors wins, they also get something. They also benefit. So they have skin in the game. It's just, it's so sinister and it's so like manipulative. It's insane if all of these things just came from one insane man. One power hungry and insane man. Also, I don't think they say this in the movie, but in the book, they talk about how the capital is in the Rocky Mountains. So it's like Denver, Colorado. And I just think it's so funny. Like, just imagine if the capital of the US was Denver, Colorado. I mean, beautiful city. I just would not think of it as a capital city. But hey, if I had to pick a place to set up camp for a capital city, maybe I'd pick Denver too. Who's to say? But yeah, I just thought that was funny. So if you didn't know, that's where the capital is meant to be in North America. And then I think District 12 is like on the East Coast, like the Appalachian Mountains or something like that. But yeah, so that's kind of the setup of Pan Am, at least explained in the first book. There's also no any sort of training or preparation for any of the tributes in the 10th Hunger Games. They literally pretty much throw them in the ring starving, and there's no sort of preparation for them like there is when Katniss goes into the Hunger Games. When Katniss goes into the Hunger Games, they have like this whole boot camp thing where they can learn how to fight, learn how to identify plants, tie knots, like pretty much any survival skill they can kind of get a crash course in before they go into the arena. Not a thing in the 10th Hunger Games. And also in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, they made it sound like a lot of the deaths that occurred in the early Hunger Games were literal like starvation or exposure deaths. And so it kind of seems like, once again, all of these changes where they're actually taking care of the tributes, like feeding them well before the Hunger Games start and giving them these crash courses in like how to fight, how to survive, is in a way just trying to ensure that it's a good show. I mean, and they also talk about this in the book, that it's all about what looks good, you know? It's all about what is entertaining. And watching people starve to death is not entertaining. They want hand-to-hand combat. They want fights, and they want bloody fights that they can broadcast to the entire country. I feel like the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is really deepening the dystopian roots of this series and making it even more dystopian than I initially thought it was, because now it has context, now it has a history, and we see how far these games have like kind of been twisted over the years and have gone like so far down this brutal rabbit hole. And it's making it more sinister, more creepy, and also really just giving it a whole other layer when I'm watching it now. So it's making it very interesting. One of the changes that I really appreciate in the movie is Elizabeth Banks's version of Effie Trinket. She makes her like the comic relief of the movie. She's just so funny. Like this one line that she said where they're like talking about the career tributes who are like literally trained all their life to go to the Hunger Games and kill people. And Effie was like, but they're not treated any different than you. They have the exact same apartment as you do. And I don't think they let them have dessert. And you can. It's just like, girl, like, least of our concerns right now. But she's so funny, and I really enjoy Elizabeth Banks's portrayal of Effie in this series as a whole. I mean, let's be honest, that is mahogany is an iconic line. Okay, so I just got to the part in the movie where President Snow is talking to the head game maker. Seneca is his name in the movie. He's not in the book. It's just the game makers as a, you know, collective entity. There's not like one particular game maker that's singled out. Anyways, it's the part in the movie where President Snow talks about how hope is the only thing greater than fear and says that's why we have a winner. A little hope is good. a lot of hope is dangerous. And in this whole monologue, he just is giving me Professor Gall. And in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, Professor Gall is basically the person that started the Hunger Games. She's one of the main people at the core of the Hunger Games as a concept. And she has a very twisted and demented view of what humanity is, and in the end, ends up mentoring Coriolanus Snow. So the fact that he, in this scene right now, that is not in the book, I will say, this scene is not in the book, but just the way that Donald Sutherland is playing President Snow in this one scene is really aligning with Professor Gall in the book, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is played by Viola Davis, I'm pretty sure. So I'm very excited to see her in it, but that's besides the point. So yeah, I think that Donald Sutherland's portrayal of President Snow is like right in line with the kind of evil path that he is starting to go down at the end of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and I love it. I think it's chef's kiss. I think it's tying in so well with the books. Donald Sutherland shouldn't be surprised. He's an amazing actor, but just had to take a moment to appreciate that because it literally gave me chills for a second because he's so ominous and so creepy and just has such a twisted mind and evil thoughts. So I just thought that was really cool that his portrayal of the character in later life is lining up with his mentor in the book. And maybe Suzanne Collins got inspired by Donald Sutherland's performance. Who's to say? I don't know when she started writing the prequel, but it does align really well with Donald Sutherland's performance in this movie. In this movie, they just made her find water so fast. She did not struggle for 1 second. She literally ran away, sat in the woods, went through her backpack, and then she found water. Like it was nothing. In the book, this girl is on the brink of dying of dehydration before she finds water. She is losing consciousness because she can't find any water. And yet in the movie, they were like, nah, she finds it immediately. That's just such a silly thing to change, in my opinion. Alrighty, so I just finished the Hunger Games movie, and there are quite a few minor changes from the book to the movie, but they're not really that big of changes, I would say. We still get to the same point in the end. There are some parts that are a lot more prominent in the book that are just not really included in the movie at all. First of all, the movie makes it seem like all of this takes place over the course of 4-ish days, when in the book, they don't say exactly how long they've been in there, but Katniss figures that she's been in the arena about 2 weeks towards the end, so it's probably a little over 2 weeks that they're in the arena. But the way that it was directed and cut together, it makes it look like it was such a shorter amount of time than that. And so things happened very quickly in the movie, for me at least. The biggest changes in this movie particularly, and this is something that I knew going in because it was the one major difference that I did notice when I went and saw the movie the first time, and that is the total erasure of both Katniss and Peeta's injuries/disabilities. In the book, Katniss completely goes deaf in her left ear when she blows up the supplies because the explosion, it basically destroys her eardrum. And there's a good chunk of time where she is trying to get her ear to stop bleeding, and she is wandering around the woods disoriented, her equilibrium's all off. It's a whole thing in the book, and then just didn't happen at all in the movie. And the other one is Peeta's injury/disability. And his is even more prominent than Katniss's is, because when they get back to the Capitol, they do something, I don't even know what they do exactly, but they somehow restore Katniss's hearing in her left ear. But Peeta gets his leg full on amputated and has a prosthetic leg for the rest of the series. And it's just they just pretended it didn't happen at all. I literally just finished the book, but if I remember correctly, I believe it's when they're on the cornucopia and the mutated dogs or whatever are trying to get them. And one of them gets Peeta's leg, just completely destroys his leg beyond repair, even for the Capitol, which They have some pretty impressive medical treatments, remedies, medicines, all of that stuff. So I'm thinking it had to be pretty serious for them not to be able to fix it for him and have to actually amputate. But at the end of the book, during their interview, Katniss finds out that his leg was amputated. And then they just totally took that out of the movie. And I just don't know why they wanted to take those things out. And if I remember correctly, I think that the leg thing at least comes up again in the rest of the series. Maybe even Katniss's hearing comes up in the rest of the series. I don't remember, but I think that Peeta's leg is like something that is fairly prominent throughout the series. At least enough that it's kind of weird that they just got rid of it entirely. But anyways, the movie's still good. I still think overall a lot of it is fairly close to what I imagined when I was reading the book. But there were, like always, some things that they changed for whatever their reasons are. But I still think that the movie is really good. I still think the book is really good. So I am excited to continue this with Catching Fire. But for now, it is getting late. It is past 11 o'clock and I need to go to bed because I gotta work in the morning. So I will check in with you guys later. Bye.